All right. Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome to this November edition of our MCHRI Seminar Series. I'm Kara Meister. I'm honored to be sharing with you three excellent presenters who will be discussing leveraging PEDSnet and how you can use it to grow your practice and your research. We are joined today by Grace Lee, Professor of Pediatrics, specifically infectious disease. Keith Morse, who's really a guru of PEDSnet and will be able here to give us our 20,000-foot overview and make it tangible for all of you who are either here live in person or will join us with the recording. And also very excited to have Yair Bannett here. He's an instructor of pediatrics and really knows the nitty-gritty of this program. So happy to have all three of you. As a plug for December, be sure to check out our upcoming seminar on pulmonary hypertension and BPD, hosted by Maya Kumar and Leah Steckes. And in case you missed it, our annual symposium, which occurred just a few weeks ago in October, was really great, showcasing some of our operational efforts for research, really focused on equity this year, as well as showcasing the wonderful work done by our trainees and our faculty. So you can check out any of the recordings here online. Thanks, as always, to our education committee. If you have ideas for future monthly seminar topics, or if you would have any ideas about our annual symposium, we're always happy to collaborate and hear about what would be most helpful for you. All right, so with that, we're 2 minutes ahead of schedule, so we'll give you guys some extra time. Keith, I think you're starting us off, so take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kara. So Grace is here and will be joining us for the panel discussion at the end, but I'm going to be doing the majority of the talking for the next 25 minutes before handing it off to Yair. Thank you all so much for being here this morning. My name is Keith Morse. I am a pediatric hospitalist here at Stanford and get to talk to you today in my role as the co-site PI for Stanford's involvement in PEDSnet. We're going to be talking about electronic health record research using PEDSnet. So EHR data here at Stanford is, for the most part, managed by Research IT or RIT, and every year RIT puts on a one-day symposium for the Stanford community. I was at this event a couple of years ago and we were at the final session of a 7-hour day. We'd had great programming with lectures, demonstrations, small group discussions, and we were wrapping up with a session on REDCap, and the presentation was over. We were in the Q&A session and somebody raised his hand and he says, I'm an oncology fellow and I have a research question, but I just need access to the data. How do I get access to the data? And I feel for this guy. Using EHR data generally and using EHR data at Stanford is confusing. Depending on where you sit in this organization, you have between 6 and 12 ways that you can get access to EHR data for research. The best way that I can think about how to summarize these different modes of access is along 2 axes. The first axis is the pain axis. So how much hassle and headache is required? Approvals, money, waiting, data ambiguity, technical expertise. And then there's the value axis. So what is the utility or impact of this data? How nuanced of a question can you potentially ask? What are the magnitude of the results? Can this research lead to a small paper, a big paper, a grant, a promotion? We can plot the different ways of using EHR data somewhere along these axes But the reason that I bring this up is that what we're going to be talking about today is PEDSnet, and PEDSnet exists in this upper right corner of this grid, or these axes. I say this to point out a couple of things. One is the activation energy for a PEDSnet study is non-trivial, and I don't want to sort of sort of hype up the experience to only talk about the great things. There is a fair amount of work to get involved in a PEDSnet study. The timeline for these studies typically is not well suited for residents, fellows, or other trainees. It's really more along the line of what a faculty or junior faculty member would be geared up for. But with that pain comes immense benefit. PEDSnet is an exceptional resource for doing impactful research. It can connect researchers to a network of like-minded researchers nationally, and it is an effective mechanism to earn grant funding. So the goal for today is to give you an overview of PEDSnet, but more specifically, if it seems like PEDSnet could be helpful in your research, we would love to chat with you to help you learn more. Plan for today is here. We're going to be talking about what PEDSnet is. We're going to be talking about who PEDSnet is intended for, and we're going to talk about the different ways that you can get involved with PEDSnet, one of which Yair here is going to be able to go into great detail on. So PEDSnet is a pediatric EHR research consortium that currently has 11 academic hospitals that are listed here. The network has been around since 2015 and is funded largely through grant support from PEDSnet. The goal is to improve pediatric care through research and to enable a pediatric learning healthcare system. The benefits largely fall into two buckets. The first is the obvious one about data. So data is shared from each participating site on a quarterly basis. It is, for those of you who are familiar with different data schemas, we use a OMOP-based schema that has been modified for pediatric and PEDSnet specific needs, but it's mostly OMOP. It is longitudinal going back to 2009, and the database contains what you would reasonably expect in a EHR-based database. So we have patient demographics, diagnoses, procedures, medications, visit information, vital sign information, lab results, those types of things. Given the scope of the participants in the network, we have about 15% of the children in the US are seen by a PEDSnet site at least once. The network was originated out of CHOP, and CHOP continues to serve as the data coordinating center. So our quarterly submissions are sent to CHOP. CHOP does data harmonization. They run a lot of data quality reporting, and then they are also the primary executor of data extraction and analysis work. So benefit one is around the data. That's pretty obvious. Benefit two is around a streamlined administrative process, and this is was designed as a very intentional perk of using this network. When sites join the network, they sign on to a general purpose umbrella IRB that allows researchers to perform retrospective EHR-based studies, so a phenotype-based IRB. So as a researcher, if you have a research question that fits under this umbrella IRB, you have to get approval from PEDSnet, but then you don't have to get any additional approval from any of the participating sites. So 11 IRBs for the price of one. However, if you have a more complicated research question, if you have prospective data collection components, or if you are interested in using data elements that are not currently considered part of the PEDSnet data model, you need a separate IRB, you need an IRB amendment, and that requires approval from the sites. But for the most part, for the bread and butter types of studies that PEDSnet excels at, it is an amazingly streamlined process. In terms of what types of studies are underway with PEDSnet now, there are over 70 recently completed or currently ongoing studies. The website, which I've got included at the end of the talk here, has a full list of the projects and their associated publications. In general, these studies span both general pediatrics and subspecialty pediatrics. The network actually originated out of a GI IBD research consortium, but has since expanded to cover general pediatrics. Obviously, we have done lots of work around COVID. You can see a couple of examples of publications here. And then we are also a participant in the Recover Initiative, which is the NIH's $450 million push to study long COVID. We've got a couple of key roles in that research initiative. In terms of funding, so to date, the network, this is a little bit of an older slide, but the network has earned over $90 million in funding to support PEDSnet work. The pie chart on the right shows where this funding is coming from. You can see that it is primarily PCORI Foundation and NIH based. And then at the bottom, you get our success rate. And I think this is the of working with PEDSnet. This speaks to both the quality of the network itself and the quality of the research that the community is using it to engage in. Here at Stanford, we have been a member of PEDSnet since 2001. So we are still one of the newer members of the network. We have been doing a lot of work to fine-tune our data and really polish up our contributions to the data model, as well as flesh out our processes for how we engage with the network. We are currently participating in 5 grants that are initiated outside of the network, but have a Stanford component. So we have nephrology, rheumatology, infectious disease, and we have a couple of data science or informatics based grants. We also recently submitted our first Stanford-led application, and that just got some positive feedback, but we're still waiting on the official word for that grant submission. On the right, you can see our PEDSnet team. We are led by Grace Lee. Jessica manages all the key aspects to keep our program up and running. And then Maria is our data analyst who really gets down in the nitty-gritty of managing our data. We work closely with Research IT, and we also are the beneficiaries of generous support from MCHRI. To give you a sense of what one of these studies looks like, we have the preserving kidney function in children with chronic kidney disease, or the PRESERVE study. PRESERVE is a PCORI-funded $5 million effort that's led out of CHOP by Chris Forrest and Michelle Denberg. Mary is walking the walk here by serving as the Stanford site PI for our participation in this study. broadly speaking, the work here has three aims. The first is around expanding the scope and quality of EHR data that is available for kidney-specific research. So making PEDSnet better for this study and all subsequent kidney-based studies. They are also linking PEDSnet data to US RDS and CKIDS, which are two existing longitudinal databases around CKD and ESRD. Goal 2 is around the sort of what you expect as more traditional EHR-based data analysis. We are doing some work around defining normal blood pressure ranges for pediatric patients, as well as some comparative effectiveness work on different methods of monitoring and treating mild to moderate CKD. And then finally, the third component is around understanding the patient's lived experience, patient and caregivers' lived experience with blood pressure management. And I bring this study up because it is a good example of the both retrospective and prospective study types that can be executed and supported by PEDSnet. Retrospective in the sense of analyzing retrospective EHR data, but also prospective from the augmented recruiting that is supported by PEDSnet, who in this case, we're using it for additional data collection around the lived experience. So who should consider a PEDSnet study? I mentioned about how this is probably not appropriate for trainees who are on campus for 1 to 3 years, but folks who are faculty and interested in to look into PEDSnet. I'd mentioned that both retrospective and prospective study designs are feasible. The question that we most commonly get is do you have to have funding to participate in PEDSnet? And the answer is not to start, but yes. So PEDSnet is in many ways set up as a mechanism for researchers to collect or to win grant funding. And so you as a study leader, you are expected to be using the network to apply for funding. One of the ways that the network supports this is that if you have a research question, the proposal gets run by a committee within PEDSnet to make sure that it is appropriate based on the types of things that PEDSnet can answer. If it is, CHOP, as the data coordinating center, will provide a feasibility study, which is essentially a sort of high-level table 1 summary statistics of for your patient population of interest about what volume can you expect to find in the PEDSnet data set. This feasibility study then gets included in your grant application to argue for the sort of seriousness of the data that you have available to answer your research question. Second question is, do you have to be an informatics researcher or data scientist in order to use PEDSnet? And the answer here is very much no. We recognize that projects of this scope and this type of work is a team sport. And so you as researchers are expected to provide sort of the clinical reasoning and the research push, but we are able to connect you with informatics or data science expertise to round out your research team. All right, moving on with how to get involved. So Yair is going to be talking about the PEDSnet Scholars Program, so I'm going to burn through this. So then moving on to study participation. So there are 2 ways to get involved in PEDSnet studies. And the first is as a Stanford representative for a PEDSnet study that was initiated by another institution. The way this works is somebody at an outside organization has a research question, submits the proposal, gets funding. once the notice of award is out, PEDSnet will look for collaborators at institutions that are able to participate. We hear about these, and then we sort of email folks in the appropriate division to find somebody who would want to be involved. We obviously follow the clinical specialty of the study. So if it's a neurology study, we track down a neurologist. So if this is something that you are interested in terms of getting your feet wet in a PEDSnet study, this is a great way to do it. And you can let us know, and we can sort of keep an eye out for studies that fit your clinical area of expertise. The second mechanism is designing your own study and being the coordinating center for your own research effort. Here you design your own study, you secure your own funding, and then you engage with the network to do the analysis. I mentioned we have our first application of this type in, but this is really where we see the future of PEDSnet at Stanford is having our researchers ask their own question at a PEDSnet scale. You are all leaders in your field or soon to be leaders in your field, and we see this as a tool to help you accelerate your own research career. We are very interested in hearing about folks who would be interested in noodling through the feasibility of this type of research study. So to wrap up, just to reiterate the message from the opening slide, if any of this sounds interesting, any of this sounds appealing for your research goals, we would love to hear from you and chat more about how PEDSnet can be helpful. With that, I will pass it over to Yair to tell us about PEDSnet Scholar Program.
Great, thank you, Keith. While we transition the slides, there was a question in the Q&A about whether or not operative reports are able to be accessed.
So we don't have, so notes are an area that there's lots of interest in having access in PEDSnet. We don't currently have that as part of our standard PEDSnet data model, so it would be a new request. That doesn't mean it's not possible, and I suspect in a couple of years we will have notes be a standard part of our data model. The tricky part is that scrubbing PHI from notes is a non-trivial task, and we have to have that nailed down before we can make that part of our research network. So right now, short answer is no.
Great. And if any other participants have questions, please feel free to post it in the Q&A. All right, Yair.
Great. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Keith. Happy to share my experience in the PEDSnet Scholars Program. So my name is Yair Bannett. I'm an instructor in the Division of Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics here. And I'll share a bit about, first of all, about the PEDSnet Scholars Program, what it is, and then my own experience in it. The Scholars Program is intended to create a community of junior faculty who will progress to be leaders in their institutions and the nation in learning health system science. And this is a concept that was new to me, at least coming in, and so I've certainly learned more about that. The second goal of the program is to support the scholars in patient-centered outcome research. The curriculum of the two-year program is to build on core competencies of the learning health system science, and then provide mentorship, including mentorship around research, mentorship for health system, understanding the health systems themselves, and life course mentorship. So in terms of, again, making this interesting for local applicants here at Stanford, I wanted to also include about time commitment, because that's an important consideration when thinking about this type of participation. So in order to apply, you need to prepare improvement or implementation science or research project proposal. It's not a big proposal. As you can see, it's only 7 pages in total, as well as having letters of recommendation and including a personal statement. Then other than the actual application, what the time commitment includes is about 2 to 3 hours a month of self-paced learning through some online modules that are available and meetings that are provided to the scholars every couple of weeks. There's also a monthly 1-hour video conference that occurs. All the scholars participate in, and in those video conferences, usually you review the specific topics that you read through and prepared for. You do need to present a work in progress, usually about once a year, of the project that you're working on. That's the project that you proposed as part of the application. And then they plan to have twice a year also in-person workshops. When I did the scholars program, it didn't happen because it was during COVID. I'm hopeful that in the other cohorts that are going to come up, they will be able to do that as well. So this is the cohort I participated in. So I joined just about when Stanford joined PEDSnet at the beginning of 2021. There was PEDSnet Scholars cohort that just started, and these are the 10 scholars that were accepted to the program. And I just kind of put a list here of the places where people are from to give you a sense of how nice it is to be able to interact with all these junior faculty from other institutions across the US. And maybe just saying a little bit about the people who are there in these cohorts, and you can actually explore this on the website, on the PEDSnet website, which I encourage you to take a look at. You can see the 3 cohorts of the scholars, and you can look at their profiles as well. So just to mention, the people here that you see are could be either MDs, could be clinicians, or not necessarily. It could be also just researchers. There's nurses, there's PhDs, public health, other, different disciplines. And typically they would be junior faculty. So it would have to be either an instructor or an assistant professor or associate professor to participate in the program. And then I'd like to also share a little bit about specific highlights that I found were very useful in the program. So one important topic I learned about, and which I didn't really know a lot about going in, is around stakeholder engagement. There's a whole module in the 2-year program that talks about stakeholder engagement and a lot of learning, specifically also around PCORI, what PCORI developed in terms of curriculum for stakeholder engagements, and learning about the different levels of engagement and strategies for engagement. Another really great part that I took away was a hands-on experience in QI methodology. There's really great mentors in the program who walk you through a specific QI project that you're either doing, or it could be unrelated to your research. But it really is a great way of actually going through a QI project, going through the specifics of how to apply the methodologies of QI. And as I mentioned earlier, a new thing to me was the terminology of the frameworks and the concepts that are used in what's called the learning health system, and what that means. Especially important if you're thinking about applying for grants and really understanding the frameworks and the concepts of what that means. Patient-centered outcome research in general is another topic that I think I've learned a lot. I didn't know as much about it, and I've learned a lot around, again, a lot of efforts that were done in other institutions to create pediatric patient-centered outcomes, and a lot of the work that Chris Forrest has led, who's the person also leading the Scholars Program. And then lastly, the implementation science concepts and strategies, which really relate also to the work that I'm doing in my research. And so that was another great way for me to learn more about implementation science and how it's being used. Other than the topics that I went through, I wanted to highlight also a few important benefits of participating in the Scholars Program from my perspective. One is working with mentors in other institutions. You get assigned a mentor from another institution as part of this program. So I was assigned Chris Forrest from CHOP, who was great to receive his mentorship, his input on as I was developing my research project. Another really great thing is connecting with peers in other institutions. You both get to work in small groups throughout the 2 years, as well as in conferences. For example, in the last PAS conference, we got to kind of get together and meet and the scholars, and that was really nice as well. I think it's important also for future collaborations. Once you're thinking about PEDSnet in your research, it really is important to have champions in other institutions who might be potential collaborators. Another important piece that gets more to the topic that Keith spoke about actually accessing the PEDSnet data. So it's important to understand that the PEDSnet Scholars Program does not involve receiving access to the PEDSnet data. This is more, again, training the future junior faculty. But still, we did get to learn more about how to access the PEDSnet data that lives at CHOP. We also specifically received access to the CHOP Atlas tool. All the scholars received access to that. So just again, as part of the training around accessing data and how to use Atlas. So as part of that, we actually got access to the Atlas tool that allows you to query the fields in PEDSnet, in the latest PEDSnet data set, basically, which is, again, a great way of thinking about future projects and looking at the data yourself if you're part of the PEDSnet Scholars Program. And then this is my last slide, just in terms of, one before last slide. So this is about the 2 funding options if you're applying for the Scholars Program. There's usually 1 to 3 spots of K-12 funding, which is what funds this Scholars Program. And if you do receive one of those slots, that would count as a Career Development Award time. And most of the scholars, and this includes myself, are able to secure spots that are institution-funded spots. So the Scholars Program is not funding your time; they're just letting you be part of the program. And for us here at Stanford, I think the great thing is in our department we have the Bridge to K program, which really allows you to receive the funding that you need to participate in such a program. That's what allowed me throughout my Bridge to K program to be able to have funding. And the great thing is, as I said just now, it doesn't count as career development time for me. So I was able to participate in the PEDSnet data, but still I was able to then apply for a career development award, which I recently received from NIMH. And the career development award that I received actually, again, is really an expansion of what I've done in the PEDSnet program. So I have here the aims of the K-23, the Career Development Award that I presented. I'm interested in enhancing quality of care measurement for ADHD at our local primary care network here at Stanford, and then transition to developing and implementing quality improvement interventions using these novel quality metrics. And I think a really important piece, as I was applying for the K-23, it really helped me lay out how I'm part of the PEDSnet program, how I'm a scholar, and how the PEDSnet is going to be an important future directions for me to then show how I can generalize this type of work using data from other PEDSnet sites. So I think the engagement with the PEDSnet was a really important component that allowed me to show that this is a viable project that can then be expanded once I can continue to R-level funding, which would allow me to use the PEDSnet data. So that's all I have, and I'm happy to answer any questions people may have.
Congratulations, Yair, on your K-23. That's remarkable. There are quite a few questions in the chat. Most of them have been answered live, but we will reiterate some of them so that those who are attending only by audio or looking at the recording don't miss them. I want to be sure that first we cover that the types of data that are available. There's lots of questions about the elements, such as operative notes and pathology.
Yep, it's a great question, and if you go to the PEDSnet website, there's an overview of the data model they use and the associated data elements that are currently available. The list there is not static, and that's not sort of the be-all end-all of what potentially could be part of PEDSnet. For many studies, they include a data augmentation based on the specific needs of the study. So, for example, we have a cardiology study that's interested in tracking outcomes following device implantation, and we had to augment the data model to include lot number and other specific numbers for the devices that were implanted. That is a non-trivial extra work. And so it's not something that can be done sort of routinely, but the potential for shifting the model is possible. And then there's a question about operative reports and other free text elements. So we don't have imaging, like imaging DICOM objects available, nor do we have sort of free text reports. But as I said earlier, the interest around free text is gaining a lot of momentum. A lot of the work that we're doing with our Recover initiative does include notes, and so we are sharing as a result of that. So the hope is that the sort of the momentum and the comfort that the organizations are taking in order to share these notes for Recover will continue over to enable them to be shared more generally, but we're not there yet.
Great.
And actually, I'll just chime in that what Keith mentioned about PEDSnet being essentially a dynamic data model is important to remember. So oftentimes we're actually increasing or improving the quantity and the quality of the data coming in when people ask specific questions. And it really helps to have that grant funding because we have time to really dive deep, explore. And then once that data model incorporates those changes, they tend to live in perpetuity. So this data model continues to get better over time. So if you asked a question today, is this easily available and off the shelf? It might not be today. With grant funding, we could make it. But if you were to come back in a couple of years, the answer might be very different depending on who is asking what questions and how deep we're diving into the data. So just as a reminder, not to worry that it means that it'll never be answered, and it definitely can be answered with funding. And in the future, it's possible that just from a feasibility perspective, everything will look a little bit different.
Right. And in a similar vein, there was a question about how difficult it would be to add a particular data element not currently available. For example, if a new pandemic assay comes online.
Yeah, so if the new data element is a new lab that is a less challenging ask than other types of things, we have strong processes for collecting both lab types and lab results, and we update our database of recognized lab entities on a regular basis. For obviously sort of COVID stuff, we've been doing lots of changing of our vocabularies, adding lab results as well as new vaccines obviously didn't exist. So that type of thing actually happens more or less automatically. If it is something that is totally obscure that perhaps is only available at Stanford and one other place, that may be a little bit of a different question. But if it is part of the general use lab test equipment that is used nationally, that stuff gets added automatically.
Yair, not to put you on the spot, but there's a question specifically about what did you need to apply for the Bridge to K? And it seems that this PEDSnet Scholar program was quite instrumental in that effort. And maybe you can speak a little bit about how someone might consider applying for the PEDSnet Scholar program and when that's most appropriate.
Yeah, sure. So the Bridge to K program is available for fellows or also instructors, I would imagine, who are interested in having 75% of their time protected for research, with the idea that you need those few years, usually 3 years as the Bridge to K program, in order to submit and prepare a competitive K award to NIH. Because Dr. Mary Leonard, who really initiated this here at Stanford, it's under the understanding that most fellows out of clinical fellowships here in pediatrics are not prepared to submit a competitive K award. You really need to build some stamina and publication records and things like that. So that's our department offers this program, and you need to apply. There's a link. I don't know if maybe someone I can probably find the link. And then once you're selected, it allows you to have 3 years of protected time. It's not the only way, I think, of applying. If you have other mechanisms, if your division have funds, some divisions have funds to allow some instructors to have protected time, that's also fine. It doesn't have to be the Bridge to K program. And specifically for the PEDSnet Scholars Program, as I mentioned, you can apply asking for funding for their K-12 funding if you do not have local protected times. So you can, what I actually did is I said, I kind of checked both boxes and I said, hey, if I can get the K-12 funding, great. And if not, I have my own funding available. And so at the end, it worked out well. But yeah, both options are available.
Excellent. Congratulations. And Dr. Leonard also commented in the chat that Bridge to K is a department of pediatrics program, and there's additional support available through MCHRI. It seems that the deadline is October 1st, so you have almost a whole year to get your application ready for that. There was also some commentary around, what project might not be a good fit for this, what has been turned down, and maybe what types of questions are the best answered. Is it more something like a rare disease, or is it something, that is ubiquitous but maybe nuanced? Are we thinking more thyroid cancer or ear infection?
Yeah, great question. So in general, the types of studies that get turned down it's largely based on infeasibility for what data is available in PEDSnet. And that is potentially because of either a sort of high level mismatch of what types of data are needed, or that the type of data and the representation that your cohort comes up as in PEDSnet doesn't have the granularity that perhaps would be required. So for if you're, and that's the type of thing that potentially comes out after the feasibility query, where we can look a little bit about the types of populations. So poor matchup between the question and the data that's available. In terms of types of questions that are available, sort of the most bread and butter way to think about it is sort of your PICO framework, in the sense of a patient population that can be defined based on criteria that is available in the EHR. So if it's something as sort of straightforward as diabetes or other sort of reasonably recognized clinical entity, that you can define with lab results, specialist interaction, diagnosis codes, procedures. That's how you identify your cohort. And then for your outcome, thinking about similar sort of thought process. Can you identify the types of outcomes that you are interested in based on what's available in the EHR? We often sort of get questions about data that is recorded in the EHR, but perhaps is sort of second tier data. And I mean things like information that gets recorded in, we talked about clinical notes, but also gets recorded in things like flow sheet rows. So when somebody does a PHQ-9 screening from bedside nursing, often that is entered as a flow sheet row as opposed to a diagnosis or something else. And there is some variability as to how many of those flow sheet rows are part of our PEDSnet data model. There are hundreds of thousands of flow sheet rows at Stanford, and only a small percentage of them are included in our data model. So figuring out that type of thing is how we end up with some ambiguity and some gray area that we have to sort of think about.
And maybe if it's okay if I chime in too. Thanks, Keith. Just a couple to speak to the rare diseases. It's actually a great network to use for rare diseases, in part because it does cover so many children's hospitals where a lot of the care is delivered. So we do encourage that. And the benefit of being part of this larger network is we might not have enough patients at a single site to be able to draw clear conclusions. But across sites, it offers that both an increase in the amount of data and the size of the population, but also the variability in care, I think, is actually really helpful to understand and study. So I would definitely advocate, if you have a rare condition, it's worth coming through PEDSnet, or at least asking the question. We recently got asked to participate in a study on spinal muscular atrophy as an example. The other thing that I wanted to highlight from Yair's talk, and thanks Keith and Yair for speaking on behalf of PEDSnet, is while grant funding is really core to the PEDSnet work that has to happen, in part because it just takes a lot of resources to make sure these studies get off the ground, and especially across a large and broad network. I did want to emphasize that both Yair and other studies that have started to come through have taken more of an implementation science focus. So while it is federally funded grants that are supporting the work, it doesn't always have to sit squarely within what is traditionally considered research. So just would think broadly about how you're defining research. And while funding is required, it is really helpful to see some examples go through, like Yair's and other colleagues who have that kind of interest, leverage PEDSnet to be able to do that. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention is, going forward in the future, and we're starting to have more studies that are looking at comparative effectiveness. There's been a lot of interest in clinical trial emulation work, in part because it is hard for us to launch clinical trials in kids. So leveraging the EHR data infrastructure to be able to inform and actually even start to recruit, as I think Keith mentioned before, for clinical trials across the entire network is a really powerful use of PEDSnet. I would say that it's still early in its development phase, but there is growing interest to leverage PEDSnet specifically for clinical trials. We do have actually Salon Lee, who many of you know, for one of the rheumatology studies is doing a comparative effectiveness on the impact of biologics on juvenile spondyloarthropathies. And so Salon, I hope I got that right. But with the goal that, there is prospective patient recruitment and, imaging studies that go with it. Again, augmented administrative infrastructure to be able to leverage the core PEDSnet data, but it's actually a great opportunity. And then the final thing I'll just mention is that I will say that the administrative efficiencies, so Mary Leonard, MCHRI, has supported unbelievable administrative infrastructure that really, in my mind, has eased our ability to do research, and it reduces that activation energy needed. So while Keith mentioned it still requires a lot of effort up front, I will tell you that this single IRB and a common DUA and this collaboration across sites, I think makes it so much easier to nest into this umbrella approach and then augment with additional data that's needed for your particular study. So I would strongly advocate it if you have any interest in leveraging this network. Thanks.
Great. And along those same lines as to what may be appropriate and what may be the future of PEDSnet, MCHRI and Stanford Medicine Children's Health are making a huge push for community engaged research. What data elements might be helpful for researchers that are available in PEDSnet?
Sure. So the types of patient data that's available are what I would consider sort of the routine demographic things that are available in the EHR around sort of age, race, ethnicity, those types of things. We benefit, however, from a sort of broad network of both parts of the country and sort of socioeconomic statuses that those organizations cover. Texas Children is sort of the prime example. They've just joined the network, and they have a huge outpatient network of underserved patients. We also, because PEDSnet is sort of from day one funded by PCORI, there has always been an emphasis on patient engagement in research. So I gave the example of the PRESERVE study with our with the sort of prospective component around the patient experience. Many of our studies have a patient or provider component to the work. Dimitri Kostakis at University of Washington is putting together, or has been putting together, a patients and family research core where they develop a network of families at these prospective sites who are interested in supporting research generally and are sort of available for collaboration with studies where there's interest. So this patient engagement has been part of PEDSnet for a long time.
Excellent.
Yeah, and we have two parents and one youth who actually engage on behalf of Stanford in this larger PEDSnet network. I just wanted to answer, yes, we are at Stanford officially part of PEDSnet since January 2021, and we are also now part of PEDSnet, which is, we are one of many patient-powered networks within PEDSnet. But PEDSnet, and through our participation in PEDSnet, we are now a member of PEDSnet that has much broader reach. We are the only pediatric-focused network, but it's a really great level of engagement and emphasis on parents, patients, family members really being a part of that research. I just want to mention a couple other things. Through the NIH Recover grant, we actually have a couple of new opportunities. So one is that there has been a great interest, and we actually now are starting to collect social determinants of health data at the community level, using linkages to census block groups, specifically interest in the area deprivation index, as well as the childhood opportunity index, as measures that we can use and to understand health inequities or better study health equity as a core component of what we're doing. It's obviously incredibly important for COVID-19, but it is important, I would argue, across the board. So really important work that's underway. As many of you know, many institutions are now starting to incorporate the EPIC social determinants of health wheel. And while that is not yet standardized, it is actually something that, again, PEDSnet is really interested in leveraging that opportunity to understand if we can capture at the individual level and not just at the community level, more information that would, again, help us think about improving our interventions and the health impact on kids and families. And then the final thing I'll just mention is that through PEDSnet, there is a connection. We actually now collaborate with OCHIN, which is and I will not do it justice, but OCHIN actually encompasses a large group of federally qualified health centers. Gardner, actually, my understanding is Gardner, our own federally qualified health center, is now about to engage with the OCHIN network. So there is actually ample opportunity through PEDSnet to also engage more broadly. And we have been working with our OCHIN collaborators specifically on some of the social determinants of health measures for the Recover project.
That's wonderful. Along those same lines, and Dr. Leonard is reporting that Gardner just went live with OCHIN, so that's great. Is there an opportunity, or is the data amenable to combine data sets? So what data you may get from PEDSnet, could you combine it with insurance or SEER data or other types of patient or socioeconomic information?
So that is a super interesting area and a very hot research topic. In general, the barriers for that type of linkage is that you have to know PHI to link to data sets, and that's very difficult. The PEDSnet is a DID network, and so we can't add patient identifiers to link to an external database. However, there is sort of emerging technology, it's called PPRL hashing, privacy preserving record linkage hashing, which takes PHI, hashes it into a cryptographic code, and then you link based on the cryptographic code. And that process is being used for both our Recover data and the Preserve. So I mentioned that we were connecting the PEDSnet data to CKIDS and USRDS. So it is possible, but again, it's the kind of thing that is everybody agrees is sort of the right direction to go, and is a capability that we would like to be very good at, but we are proceeding cautiously and sort of building out our expertise with this. We talk about our collaborations with RIT. RIT has been fabulous in terms of building out this capability and working with our outside partners and vendors in order to sort of make sure we do this in the right way, because it is, while there are lots of upsides, we are also potentially exposing PHI, and so we are very cautious with how we do that. So in terms of individual studies, it's sort of in the realm of possibility, but it's not a trivial ask.
And similarly, there was a question about whether PPRL hashing will allow genomics data to be linked.
I don't know of any ongoing study now that is pushing that, but that definitely is possible.
We may have to change our the way that data comes through in our EHR. Right now, you know, it would be natural language processing for some of our reports.
Mm-hmm.
There are sort of at the national level, as Keith mentioned, some of the linkages to registries, which I think is a really powerful way to link EHR data to registry data. It's not specific to PEDSnet, but I am aware of other networks, specifically N3C and our adult PCORnet partners are really interested in engaging with all of us to be able to link that data across to see if we can really do more work, deep work in COVID.
And we are almost out of time. I think we have time for 2 questions. So one is one's a question about the IRB and kind of the logistics therein, which may be great for everyone tuning in late to understand.
Yep, it's a single IRB mechanism for the sort of bread and butter research questions. So if you're able to answer your question using the existing retrospective PEDSnet data, it's a single IRB.
Great. And then my last question is just any final thoughts from each of our panelists. So we'll start with you, Keith.
Sure. So thank you all for coming today. I think PEDSnet is putting in a lot of the legwork to make a learning health system possible. And I can tell by the sort of tone of the questions that there's lots of enthusiasm for this type of work to progress and to continue to evolve. So it's exciting to see sort of what is possible now that wasn't possible 2 years ago, and then what will be possible 3 years from now.
Awesome. Yair, any comments?
Yeah, I think, again, thanks for joining everyone. I am a very happy user of the PEDSnet Scholars Program. I look forward to be also an active user of PEDSnet data itself. If anyone has any questions or wants to reach out to me about my experience, I'm very happy to share and brainstorm with anyone interested in following that path as well.
Great, thank you for volunteering your mentorship. And Grace, any final thoughts for our seminar?
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to, and you know, the PEDSnet team really looks forward to engaging with individuals across the campus. We really are here to serve as sort of the infrastructure, administrative data collaboration infrastructure to enable things to be easier to solve problems that are really important to the health of children. So if you have questions, please reach out. We're really interested in ensuring that not only are we participating in this network, but we have many of our you know, unbelievable colleagues across campus leading some of this research and innovation across campus. So if you have any interest, we'd be happy to help. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. And thank you to all of the attendees. There were great questions. You made my job easy as a moderator, and we will see you all in December.